Diolch yn fawr, Keith. Thanks very much. Bore da chi gyd. Good morning. Thanks for the introduction earlier as well, Keith. I don't think anybody said anything I've done is radical in the past, so I'm really pleased with that. I can tell my children. But look, thanks for the invitation to gate crash your housing social value party, I guess, with some views from perhaps the dirtier world of infrastructure. And I am conscious that this is a housing type forum. And I'm going to be sharing some thoughts from the infrastructure bit, if you like, the civil engineering bit. So there is bits here about transportation, energy systems, water supplies, etc. But of course, a lot of our contractors are as well delivering the infrastructure to support your housing development. So there is a link there as well, you know. It's a double act this morning, so I've only got about 10 minutes before I hand over to Hywel. So I'm going to keep this fairly high level from my point of view, not too much data. I think that'll come from Hywel. But I wanted to focus on, I guess, the opportunities that we have to grab in terms of social value, now more than ever. I think Lee's covered that. Some of the good stuff that's already happening, and we shouldn't lose sight of that, but also the frustrations, I think, of some of the lost opportunities. And we see that infrastructure as much as anywhere else. Also some pointers as to what I think we need to do to grab those lost opportunities and turn them into real social value. And that's for all our investments, not just the big stuff. There is a tendency in our sector just to look at the big stuff, you know. And finally, the importance of the clients, contractors and communities working together on this. And it doesn't always happen that way. So I'm talking about the infrastructure sector. I know in construction, we all like to say we're different, but I do hope that some of these things will chime with you in whether you're housing or building. But look, if you take nothing else from what I've got to say, I just want to stress two things really. This is all about the clients, contractors and communities being bothered to deliver social value. Because if you're not bothered, you won't do it. You certainly won't do it well. And secondly, I think we're doing some good stuff here, but we can do much, much more, much better. But we need to look at this social value strategically from the investments we put in rather than just what we can get from individual one-off projects. And we're guilty of that in the infrastructure sector. We never fully exploit, I think, the social value opportunities of all our investments. So I think on the positive side, there's some really good stuff going on and has been for quite some time. And you'll get that from Hywel in a minute. But there's so many instances as well where opportunities to add that value, they've either been badly handled or lost, or sadly not even considered at all. And it doesn't need to be like that. It just needs those three groupings to be bothered about doing this. So I'm going to keep saying that there is good stuff going on in our sector, because there is, and there's some real champions out there. But they're few and far between on the whole, you know. And I've got I'm a little bit jealous of what you've got in the housing sector, some of the stuff that you do. And I think most of all, it's the approach that you bring to this as clients, as social housing clients. And I think that's kind of what we're missing in the infrastructure sector, I think, is that client, if you like, culture to social value. It feels different. It feels like it's more part of you. And I think that's understandable because you're all about homes and people and communities. And, you know, I can see for you, it's important that your communities benefit from that investment more broadly. I think it's slightly different the drivers are slightly different in infrastructure, and that's a frustration that we need to certainly need to change. The only thing I'd pose a question to you now, and perhaps we can touch on it in the breakout sessions. Are you convinced that your contractors are being well supported by you to help you deliver social value? It shouldn't be about just clauses in contracts. I'll come back to that, but I think we're missing a trick when we keep focusing on too much procurement and too many contractual clauses. I think it's about more than that. So in the infrastructure sector, I think the drivers are different, and I think that economic bit has been more to the fore. I think it needs to change, sure, but for far too many in our sector, the social value bit is still seen as a bit of an add-on. Sometimes it's a necessary and inconvenient add-on, and it detracts from what people really want to do, which is deliver that job. We can't have that mentality anymore. And again, it isn't true of every single client or contractor for that matter, and Hywel will pick up on that. But I think there's far too many that don't get it and don't want to get it either. You know, they do tend to be judged on things like delivering to time and to cost rather than social value. So back to what Duncan mentioned, you know, unless we start questioning what value are we given and what is that value, then it's difficult for some people to move from that time and cost thing. So, are we missing a trick? And I think we are. I think despite some of the good stuff that's going on in infrastructure, tends to be focused on the major highways projects or the major school construction projects. They're successful social value programs. They tend to be associated with those fairly big investments, projects which maybe continue for about 3 to 4 years. So you get scale, you got longevity and continuity. But the issue for me is, I think we miss the opportunity from all those programs of smaller projects. I mean, Lee has announced, projects, local transport grant and resilient roads funds. Those tend to get overlooked when we talk about social value because they're deemed to be too small. And I think, from the £2 billion plus that we spend on infrastructure per year, about half of it features very little or no social value. So that's almost, if you take the £2 to £3 per pound of investment in social value, that's almost £3 billion of lost social value. And clearly we couldn't afford to do that as a nation before. We certainly can't now. So, why does it happen? I think it happens because some individual investments, they are deemed too small to worth bothering with. Unless we change that mentality, we're going to still focus on the heads of the valleys or the major, schools builds as being ways of doing this. But I think we just need to make sure that it goes further than that onto some of the smaller projects. So it's also linking some of these things to some of those longer term contractor frameworks that you will have in place. And I know clients on the infrastructure side will have in place as well. It's what cumulative social value we can do with linking up some of these smaller jobs. And I think we lose a lot of that because we don't want to think too strategically about social value. And we've touched on this already. I think worst of all, far too many, and it is clients in our sector, are focused, they're obsessed with taking a fairly transactional approach to social value. So in other words, I'll tell you what to do. You give me a price. If you're successful, which tends to be the lowest price, you get on, you deliver it, you deliver the social value as well. Don't bother me with it. It's your problem. Now I've passed it on to you. Tell me when it's done, or really, I probably don't even care if it's done. I just want to get that job finished. So we've got an issue there, I think. And, can we do better on this? I think the simplest thing would be to copy the good performers. Plenty out there, but we're just not seeing that happening at scale. So if I try to round this up a little bit, some strategic pointers, I think, from my point of view, focus on value, whatever that may be. And I know you can say that about everything. We've touched on it already. But when it comes to social value, it's about people and communities, not commodities. And, the people don't fit neatly into those boxes. They need to feel valued. So if you're not going to do that, then you're probably better off doing nothing at all, because it has probably a more detrimental effects when it comes to creating jobs and so on. But if you're a client in the public sector, and I would class social housing in there as well, you've got a moral and a legal obligation to do it. Your best place to do it as a public sector. You can reflect those things, those values in your procurement and suppliers, and importantly, enforce those requirements as well. Because if you don't do that, very quickly, the supply chain will work out that you're not interested, and they will price accordingly and act accordingly. So, you'll hear from Hywel in a minute. If you're a supplier, it is really important anyway. You want to add value to your business in so many ways. I think secondly, think strategic and long term. It has to be about collaboration, not transaction. So when we do this on a job by job basis, it just doesn't work unless it's those really big jobs where you've got the economies of scale. Just because you do lots of small jobs, and you probably do in your sectors as well, for the same, same clients, the same, even different clients, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. What you need to do is think long term, join the dots, join the jobs as well. So, that £1 billion of investment on smallish jobs, that's a huge loss of social value unless we capture it. So use the contractor frameworks to align the clients, the contractors, and the communities, and that social value will start to flow. And then thirdly, in terms of collaboration, public, private sector. Yes, we have a big stake in this as a private sector, but you as a public sector, or the public sector, has an even bigger stake in this. It's the economy of your local communities. It's that work for local businesses, the social responsibilities, even down to educational responsibilities. Local authorities have a local education authority role. They can use this investment to prop that up as well and to support that. So, my frustration is, why doesn't the public sector, I guess, pull together some of those agencies, create social value bodies, if you like, that suppliers, contractors can just tap into. When they win a job, they can tap into that. They can pull people off the unemployed list, people from disadvantaged communities. They can tie into the schools. What they need is that structure to have been set up for them already to a certain extent, rather than them trying to set it up on an individual job-by-job basis, which you can do for a long-term job, but not for a small, £100,000 job. So make it easier for the private sector to support. And I would say, finally, just care about it, because, the clues in the social and value words, or the communities and the benefits, it's about hearts and minds. So it's back to that leadership that I think a few of you have mentioned. We've got to have that leadership right from the very top. Once you've got that, it'll flow through to your suppliers as well. But don't hide it all. Don't hide behind, rather, some pretty meaningless clauses and targets. You do need to lead on this and be seen to be leading. So just finally, I keep getting told by people in the construction sector, when it comes to social value, when I'm trying to preach the gospel, as it were, keep saying, why should I be doing this? Because I'm not a social worker. And I think the reality is, we may not be social workers, but all of us need to have a social conscience in this matter. That's me done. Diolch am wrando.
Thanks, Ed. That's really good stuff. I've seen a few comments coming through. Claire Watkins has said that actually that sort of working in the space between contractors, this goes well beyond sort of clauses and what have you. It's that thing about relationships as you focused on, Ed, which is a really important point.
Thank you, Keith, and good morning all. Timing is not an issue for me. A lot of the things that I was going to discuss in terms of setting the scene have already been done. So I'm going to skip through the first bit, but just by way of introduction, my name is Hywel. I'm an environment consultant with Costain. Until very recently, I was the environment manager on the A465 Heads of Valleys project between Brimau and Gilwan. So there's a bit of talk earlier about national contractors. Yeah, Costain are a national contractor, make no bones about it, but we have a very strong Welsh presence going back to A470 in the 1970s. So we consider ourselves very strong in terms of our Welsh heritage. So I'll just skip I was going to talk about setting the scene to start with, and then moving on to measuring the right data and understanding what value is before focusing on the A465. I'll skip the first bit, as I said, so I'll just, because the scene has been set from my point of view. So a long time ago, a long time before COVID actually, Future Generations Act, which we all know, called for a more equal Wales. More recently, we've seen a pledge by Westminster to level up Britain as how that happens. And Lee's already talked about the clean growth, the green growth, which is fantastic for us. And I think it's what we all want to hear as we transition out of COVID-19 pandemic. But governments are, of course, under pressure to demonstrate benefits and how they spend and what they spend and where they spend this money coming out of COVID-19. So spending money on infrastructure doesn't really win support and hearts and minds of local residents. So we need to be careful. And as engineers, we need to understand what the value of that spend is. So it's easy to spend the money on the NHS, school programs, because it wins our hearts and minds. But infrastructure is slightly different, and it is a challenge. It's a challenge there. So this means that when we're planning big infrastructure like a new road, we must think beyond how many meters of cube of excavation we're going to make, or how many minutes we're going to shave off travel time. And we need to think about how improved connectivity can dramatically improve people's lives. It's not just about the pounds, shillings and pence that we've already talked about. So we have 10. If we do save 10 minutes of journey time, obviously that does bring an enormous amount of social value in the long term, and from that product, from that road. The other element of value we need to articulate better are the additional societal benefits to be had from the investment in our infrastructure, such as employment opportunities, local supply chain investments, etc., which we've already talked about. We must remember people don't see or realise the investments and benefits. They see years of speed zones, and we're all frustrated with roadworks. And I suppose we've all driven past lots of cones and only seen 1 or 2 people working on that highway. I'm one of them. So as a business for Costain, our narrative is is not new. It's not new to us. We are members of the Future Generations Leadership Academy down in South Wales, and a key theme in our strategy as a business is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Sorry, excuse me.
We've lost your audio, Hywel. I don't know, is
that back now?
That's back now, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. I must have hit the mute button by mistake, sorry. So, yeah, so as a business, our narrative is not new. I'm not sure where I dropped off, so I'll just repeat the last bit. Earlier this year, we launched our responsible business commitments, which respond to the UN Sustainable Development Goals I mentioned, and the Future Generations Leadership Academy. So it's in the core of our strategy, and it's what we do in terms of Costain as a business. And I mentioned that we need to demonstrate the value of investing in infrastructure. So firstly, it's important to consider why we are valuing social outcomes and to understand the social value in its totality. We can be guilty of considering the social value we deliver within our contracts and projects in isolation. And Ed just talked about smaller projects working together in a collaborative approach, which is exactly where we need to go. And it's important to remind ourselves that we must consider our potential to influence social and environmental outcomes as we create within our immediate scope of works.
We lost you. We seem to have lost you again, Hywel. Sorry, I don't know what.
This could be that I've got 3 mad kids around the house, and they're using all the broadband at the minute, and so I'm trying to keep them quiet. So
yeah.
So I think I was around about talking about social value in terms of investment. So it's important to remind ourselves that we must consider our potential to influence social and environmental outcomes, as well as what we can create within our immediate scope of work. And the greatest potential and over the long-term scale will be from the asset itself. It's not what we do in terms of construction, but the lifespan of that asset. For example, the benefit to society from the creation of a new rail links into disconnected regions, and we've seen this recently in Ebbw Vale, which I am living next to at the moment, in the creation of the Ebbw Vale Valley line several years ago. So it's logical that our design processes must test options on the potential to create social and environmental value. As it is at this stage, this early influencing stage, where we can maximise the value of the whole asset. I'll come on to this later when I talk about the A465. So if we take a strategic approach, we can really make a sustainable difference. An element often not considered in social value thought process is what the outcomes are and the benefit for our businesses. Costain's experience tells us elsewhere, where we've used procurement as a blunt instrument, and I know there's a few procurement professionals on the line, we have seen in the past that the financial ratio of for every X £1 million of contract value, we have to generate a number of or a apprentice position. Irrespective of whether the labour is needed or not. And you'll be relieved to know that this is, for the majority of time, is not the case, and it's certainly not the case with Costain. What we've developed is a government process where all projects must produce a legacy action plan and conduct legacy workshops in 6 months of contract award. So as soon as we have that contract, right at the top of our list is social value and a legacy that we can leave behind from that contract. For a long time, we have measured our inputs, like how many hours we spent in terms of volunteering for the community and charity work. Well, this is a very useful tool, but what we need to measure, and what is arguably more important, is the impact. What impact is our financial investment makes? And that brings me nicely on to the A465 project, which I'm guessing most people on the call would have heard of. So in planning our project, we wanted to understand our demographic. Early on, one of the first things we did was start talking about statutory process and what's our demographic, where we were working in. And to do this, we produced a detailed stakeholder engagement and communication plan, identifying the key stakeholders and how we plan to engage with them, and importantly, build a relationship up. Ed talked about larger projects have a longer lifespan. The A465 at the moment is 5 years old. With design at the front end of that, we have very long, deep-rooted relationships with key stakeholders. But we didn't just stop at the statutory stakeholders. The important bit is going beyond the statutory consultees, engaging with wider community groups. And this includes members of the public at all levels of the education system, from reception classes right the way up to PhD candidates, the NHS, emergency services, national parks, etc., etc. So, and the important question to ask is, what do they value? And then the needs assessment, so what do they need? And again, that's understanding your demographic. And what this does is allows us to understand with data, because we know our demographic, what the gap is. What's the gap between economic status and social status? And for us on the A465, over a short stretch of 7 kilometres, we had Brimau at the north of the job. At the south of the job, we've got Abergavenny. 2 very different contrasting demographics with different social and economic outputs. So we had to do a lot of work early on to understand what they need and what they value. Similarly with key stakeholders, we engage positively and proactively. And one of the good examples from the A465 is the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority. So early on, we wanted to understand what they wanted from the construction of the A465, not only just the construction, but the long term, and what effect we could have on shaping the region's future tourism credentials. So we sat down with the now CEO of BBMP for some time and developed an innovative finishes protocol to understand we're just not going to build a road, which are traditionally quite great and full of concrete, but it's to blend the road into the area, into the gorge. Clearlift Gorge is a beautiful part of Wales. And the idea being that our long-term goal will bring actually tourism into the area to look at the construction and to be part of that network. Doing a similar thing with the environmental regulator, NRW, which I won't go into the detail, but what's come out of this discussion with NRW is innovative processes, a memorandum of understanding between us and NRW, because we engage with them in the design process, the construction process, through to delivery. And now NRW actually signposting people to us because of our environmental performance on that project, which has massive benefits in terms of social value. I'll come on to that later on.
We're going to have to sort of finish in about 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm just coming down to the last section, so I'll really whiz through this, okay? So in terms of measuring the benefit we brought on the A465, how do we do that? So yes, we have dashboards, as I'm sure you all do, but the important thing is to actually, what is that value? How do you measure it? And interestingly, most of our metrics align with the Future Generations and Wellbeing Act, and the 7 wellbeing goals. So we didn't use it from the onset, but recently we've applied those wellbeing goals to the outcomes of the A465 to understand how we performed, what's the social value that we've brought. So I just whipped through a few examples from each of the wellbeing goals. So under Prosperous Wales, we've put 281 new employment opportunities to the area. 80% of our spend is committed to local suppliers and our supply chain. But we don't just spend the money with them, we help them grow. So it'll be a small local supply chain. Walters is a really good example. We've worked with Walters for decades. And we started working with them when they were quite small, and we provided that advice and business planning to help them develop into huge organisations which they are today. Secondly, a resilient Wales. So as part of the project, we've included flood defences throughout the scheme, and long-term water quality of the existing water courses is all improved by our work. And as a net gain then in terms of ecological benefit and enriched biodiversity, which has other impacts, which I'll come on to, which are healthier Wales, biodiversity enhancements, circular walking routes, which has a strong link to mental health. So by taking our time and designing social value into our projects, we can make that link and say with confidence that our walking routes will improve people's mental health if we do use them, because that's well documented within academia research. More equal Wales, so we'll all talk about apprentices and bounce numbers around. We've had 69 apprentices, but what does that mean? How long are they there for? Yeah, we hit the brief for 69 apprentices, but they could have quit after 2 or 3 weeks. So we monitor them through the process, and we take them from predominantly disadvantaged areas along the A465 Heads of Valley corridor and monitor the progress. And I'm pleased to say one of our apprentices at the 2018 CITB for Welsh Apprentice of the Year. More cohesive Wales, so we presented to over 7,000 members of the local community, a range of different organisations. As well as that, we've worked with other Welsh organisations. So Tata Steel, we work closely with, complete opposite to construction and what we do, what we produce, how our business models work. But we work with them to raise the bar in terms of social value, environmental performance, health and safety performance, to make sure that Welsh organisations are aligned and actually, raising that bar. Wales with vibrant culture. So just one quick example, one of the largest structures on the A465, to name the structure, we run a bit of a local consultation with the public to name it. We named it after a World War I veteran, which brought that community together. And then a deputy minister, which we seen earlier on, actually opened the bridge. I'll just skip then, in the interest of time, to a globally responsible Wales. And this is where our sustainable procurement strategy really come to the forefront. Obviously, construction projects, as you all know, absorb a lot of materials. And where we can, we source locally, we source Welsh. And a good example of that is a rebar steel that we've used on the project. We've taken a grave-to-grave approach. So we know that all that steel on our site, from scrap to smelting, casting, bending, cutting, delivery to site, comes from a maximum of 44 miles away. There's other alternatives which we could use, as you all know, but that's the more sustainable and the most responsible procurement strategy we can come up with. And I'm going to draw a close there. I know we're running over, so apologies for running over. Apologies for waffling. I've had a lot to fit in a short space.
That was great.